I moved into Maple Glen for the peace and quiet, a charming little neighborhood lined with perfectly pruned trees, identical beige mailboxes, and an overenthusiastic community newsletter that acted like a step above the New York Times. It was the kind of place where people power walked in the mornings with insulated coffee mugs, and where a dispute over Christmas light brightness once made the local news. It should have been a quiet, uneventful place to live. And then I met her, Sandra Whitmore, HOA president, middle-aged, blonde bob, too much self-tanner, and the unmistakable air of a woman who believed the Constitution personally granted her authority over lawn decorations and acceptable porch furniture. She didn't just enforce the HOA rules, she became them. My first run-in with Sandra was over something so stupid, so trivial, that I should have known right then and there my life was about to spiral into hell. It started with my motorcycle. Nothing flashy, just a well-maintained, black and chrome bike parked neatly in my driveway. I'd had it for years, rode it to work, kept it clean, didn't rev the engine like some inconsiderate idiot at 6 a.m. But to Sandra, my bike was an affront to the very fabric of the community. I got my first notice 3 days after moving in. Dear homeowner, in accordance with HOA regulations, all vehicles must be stored in the garage when not in use. Motorcycles parked in driveways present an aesthetic inconsistency and potential safety hazard. Failure to comply may result in fines and further action. Sincerely, Sandra Whitmore, HOA president. I stared at the paper, then out at my own driveway. Aesthetic. Inconsistency? It wasn't like I had a rusted-out junker on cinder blocks. Meanwhile, 2 houses down, Old Man Jenkins had a lawn gnome army so unsettling that children refused to walk past his yard at night. But apparently, my motorcycle was the problem. I crumpled the notice and tossed it. That, as it turns out, was a mistake. The next day, Sandra showed up in person. She strutted up my driveway, clipboard in hand, radiating the confidence of a woman who once made a Starbucks barista cry over oat milk. "Mr. Carter," she began, all polite smiles and thinly veiled hostility. "I noticed you haven't moved your vehicle into your garage." I folded my arms. "That's because I don't want to." Sandra's smile didn't falter, but her eye twitched just a little. "Well, the HOA requires it." "Pretty sure the law doesn't," I shot back. "I checked the city ordinances. Nothing says I can't park in my own damn driveway." She pursed her lips, like she'd tasted something sour. "It's not about the law. It's about standards. We work very hard to maintain a certain image here, and we can't just have people," she gestured vaguely at my bike, "bringing down property values." I let out a sharp laugh. "Sandra, it's a Harley, not a meth lab." That was when I saw it, the way her face flashed with something ugly. I'd just become her new favorite project. A week later, a second notice arrived. This one threatened a fine. $50 a day until I complied. I tossed that one too. Then came the anonymous complaints, which were absolutely just Sandra, because they all had her distinct brand of passive-aggressive word choice. "Multiple neighbors have expressed concern over the disruptive presence of your motorcycle." Multiple neighbors? Funny. I'd met exactly 2 people so far. Old Man Jenkins, who couldn't hear a damn thing, and Greg from next door, who openly admired my bike. Then the fines tripled. Then a warning about potential legal action. By now, I was pissed. But also, I was kind of fascinated. How much worse could this possibly get? Then I woke up one morning to find a tow truck in my driveway. Sandra stood beside it, arms crossed, smug as hell. "This is a private towing service contracted through the HOA," she announced as I stepped outside, still in my damn pajamas. "Since you've refused to comply, we are now enforcing removal of the non-compliant vehicle." I laughed. Not a chuckle. A full, disbelieving laugh. "Sandra, you can't just tow my bike off my own property." She arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Actually, I can." She turned to the tow truck driver. "Go ahead." The driver, a guy in his 50s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, walked over, looking uncomfortable. "Look, man, I'm just following orders," and then he saw the tiny, barely noticeable police insignia near the rear wheel of my bike. His face went pale. "Oh," he muttered. Sandra frowned. "What's the problem?" The driver hesitated. Then he glanced at me. Sir, is this—" I grinned. "Yep." Sandra's smugness flickered, just slightly. "What?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to make sure only she could hear me. "That's an unmarked police bike." Sandra blinked. "You're lying." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my work emails, showing her my department ID. "I work for the city, that bike, not just mine. Technically, it belongs to law enforcement." Sandra's entire face changed. But it's in your driveway, because I ride it home, like every other damn officer with an assigned vehicle." I looked at the tow driver. "And if you so much as put a finger on it, buddy, you'll be dealing with the police union." The driver stepped back so fast you'd think my bike was on fire. Sandra, though, she wasn't giving up yet. "I don't care if you're a cop," she snapped, voice shrill now. "This is an HOA matter. You still have to comply with the rules." I just smiled, letting the silence drag. And then I delivered the final blow. "Actually, Sandra," I said, slow and deliberate, "by attempting to tow official police property, you might have just committed a felony." Her mouth opened, then closed, and for the first time, I saw it. She was afraid, but I knew, even as she turned on her heel and stormed away, that this wasn't over. Not even close. The thing about people like Sandra Whitmore is that they don't know how to lose. They don't accept it. Losing isn't just an outcome. It's an attack on the carefully constructed delusion that they are, in fact, the supreme authority in whatever little kingdom they've carved out for themselves. So, it didn't surprise me when, the very next morning, another HOA notice was taped to my front door. This one was printed on thick, embossed paper, like a damn wedding invitation. Urgent notice of code violation. Sandra had escalated. Now, my non-compliance was a serious matter requiring immediate corrective action. She'd thrown in vague legal jargon, lots of words like escalating penalties and possible lien on property, hoping I'd be too intimidated to call her bluff. I wasn't. I poured myself a coffee, sat on my porch, and took my time, reading every ridiculous word. Meanwhile, a few neighbors had started to notice the spectacle. Greg from next door strolled over, hands in his hoodie pockets. "Dude," he said, eyeing the notice. "What did you do?" I smirked. "Apparently." "I own a motorcycle," Greg whistled. "Sandra's gunning for you, huh?" "She tried to tow my bike yesterday," I said. "Found out the hard way it was an unmarked police vehicle," Greg howled. "Oh my God, you're the best thing to happen to this neighborhood in years." That moment, across the street, Sandra stepped out of her house. She spotted us, squared her shoulders, and marched right over, clipboard in hand. "I see you received your notice," she said, crisp and professional, like she wasn't still seething inside. "I'd like to discuss your compliance plan." "Sure," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "My plan is to do absolutely nothing." Sandra's eye twitched. "Then we'll be forced to take further action." "Which means," I prompted, tilting my head. She pursed her lips. "Your continued refusal to abide by HOA guidelines leaves us no choice but to fine you indefinitely and begin legal proceedings for violation of community standards." I exhaled through my nose. "Sandra, let me ask you something." I leaned forward. "Do you actually think the HOA has the power to legally seize my property over a damn motorcycle?" She opened her mouth, then hesitated. I grinned. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Sandra wasn't backing down, though. Not yet. Instead, she pivoted. "The real issue," she said smoothly, "is that your continued refusal to comply disrupts the harmony of the community." "Harmony?" I repeated. Sandra gestured vaguely around us. "The HOA exists to maintain a certain standard, to ensure a pleasant living experience for everyone. When residents refuse to comply, it creates conflict." Greg snorted. "Oh yeah, this place is just a bastion of harmony." Sandra ignored him. She looked at me with the patronizing patience of someone convinced she was dealing with a child. Perhaps, she continued, you should consider how your defiance affects the people around you. I blinked at her. Are you seriously trying to turn my neighbors against me? Greg burst out laughing. Oh, she's absolutely trying to turn the neighbors against you. Sandra's smile was tight. I'm merely suggesting that a responsible homeowner considers the greater good. Right, I drawled. And that greater good just happens to align perfectly with whatever you personally want. Sandra's nostrils flared. If you refuse to comply, you leave us no choice but to escalate to the fullest extent of HOA authority. I leaned back in my chair. Can't wait. Sandra didn't respond. She just turned sharply and stalked back to her house, her heels clicking against the pavement like an executioner sharpening an axe. Greg whistled. Man, you just made an enemy for life. I took another sip of coffee. Yeah, I muttered. I figured. The retaliation came fast. By the end of the week, I'd received a daily influx of new fines, now totaling over $2,000, which, by the way, I was never going to pay. A noise complaint for my bike, even though I'd never revved it louder than a car. Property violation notice for my trash can being on the curb for more than 30 minutes after collection. It was so blatantly ridiculous that even Greg started documenting it on his phone like it was some ongoing legal drama. Then, the real bomb dropped. I got an official letter, not from the HOA, but from a law firm. Sandra had actually hired attorneys. I read the letter over twice. At first I thought it was a scare tactic, but then I noticed something. There, buried in the legal fluff, was a fatal mistake. Sandra wasn't just claiming my bike violated HOA policy. She was arguing that by operating a law enforcement vehicle on residential property, I was in violation of city zoning laws. And that was completely, utterly, laughably wrong. See? In her desperation to get rid of my motorcycle, Sandra had overreached. She'd cited the wrong ordinance. She'd just accused a government-issued vehicle of violating a residential zoning law, a law that didn't even apply to city-owned property. And the best part, by formally accusing me of misusing a police vehicle, she had just reported herself to the city's legal department. She had officially escalated this beyond HOA jurisdiction. She'd screwed herself badly. I grinned. She had no idea what was coming. I didn't waste time. I forwarded the letter to a buddy of mine who worked in the city's legal department. Less than an hour later, he called me back, laughing. Carter, I swear to God, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I leaned against my kitchen counter, grinning. So you're telling me Sandra Whitmore, HOA tyrant of Maple Glen, just reported a legally registered police vehicle for zoning violations? Oh, it's worse than that, my buddy said. Not only is she wrong, but by escalating this to city legal, she's actually triggered a review of the entire HOA's enforcement practices. I nearly dropped my coffee. Wait, what? He chuckled. Yeah, see, when she filed that claim, she didn't just file it against you. She filed it against the municipality, which means the city is now looking into whether the HOA has been overstepping its authority. I whistled. So, basically, she just opened a massive can of worms on herself. Oh yeah, this is going to be messy. I hung up the phone, feeling an almost sinister satisfaction. Sandra wanted a war? Fine. But she just handed me a nuclear bomb to drop on her empire. The next HOA meeting was the most chaotic, catastrophic event in Maple Glen history. Sandra walked in like she always did, wearing that smug, authoritarian confidence, clutching her clipboard like it was the staff of divine judgment. I sat near the back, arms crossed, watching the show. The meeting started as usual, with Sandra droning, on about community standards and maintaining order. But then, right when she was about to move past new business, I raised a hand. Before we wrap up, I said, I think we need to talk about a legal issue. Sandra barely glanced at me. Unless it's related to community maintenance, this is not the appropriate forum for... Oh, it's definitely related, I cut in. See, Sandra, I got your letter from the HOA's attorneys. I pulled it from my pocket and held it up. And I passed it along to the city's legal department. Sandra's face dropped. The room went silent. I spoke with them personally, I continued. Turns out your little legal threat wasn't just bogus, it also triggered an official city review of the HOA's authority. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Greg, sitting a few rows ahead of me, whispered a delighted, "Oh, shh." Sandra's expression turned stony. "That's completely unnecessary," she said quickly. "The HOA operates within its legal rights." "Do we?" I interrupted, pretending to be confused. "Because, according to city legal, a lot of the fines and restrictions you've been enforcing might not actually be legal at all." Someone in the audience gasped. I leaned forward, voice dripping with mock concern. "For example, did you know that the HOA can't legally fine homeowners beyond a certain limit? Because apparently you've been overcharging people for years." Now, full-blown outrage rippled through the room. Sandra's face was practically glowing red. "That is a complete mischaracterization." "Oh, and about those towing policies?" I pressed on. "Turns out you actually have zero legal authority to remove vehicles from private driveways. So when you tried to tow my motorcycle, you weren't just abusing HOA power, you were violating city law." That got an audible reaction. A few people turned to glare at Sandra. Others started whispering furiously. One older man near the front adjusted his glasses. "Wait, you mean all those fines I paid last year? Probably illegal," I said cheerfully. A woman in the back spoke up. "She fined my son $100 for leaving his skateboard in the yard. And she threatened to evict my mother for having a flower box that wasn't HOA approved," another voice added. Sandra's composure cracked. "Now, wait just a minute," she started, but it was too late. The room had turned on her. Residents stood up, demanded answers, started shouting over each other. The HOA board members, who had always meekly followed Sandra's lead, looked horrified. This was mutiny. The HOA president of 10 years was drowning, and there was no way out. And then, the final nail in the coffin. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Ms. Whitmore," he said carefully, "in light of these concerning revelations, I think we need to take a vote." Sandra turned to him, panicked. "A vote on what?" He hesitated. Then, with perfect poetic justice, he said, "A vote to remove you as HOA president." Sandra lost the vote by a landslide. She tried to fight it, threatened lawsuits, ranted about ungrateful homeowners, even tried to claim I was leading an organized attack against the HOA. But the truth was too damning. By the end of the month, she was gone. The HOA, now under new leadership, started rolling back fines, refunding homeowners, and revising the rules to be actually reasonable. People started treating me like some kind of folk hero. And Sandra? Oh, she got her poetic justice. See, after years of bullying people into compliance, Sandra suddenly found herself on the receiving end of the same nonsense she once enforced. Turns out, after her removal, someone did a deep dive into her own property. Records. And wouldn't you know it? Sandra Whitmore had been violating HOA guidelines for years. Her house's paint color? Not approved. Her hedges? Taller than regulation? Her side gate? Built without a permit. Within weeks, the new HOA board started hitting her with the same fines and violation notices she had thrown at everyone else. And the best part? She couldn't fight it, because she was the one who wrote the rules. The last time I saw her, she was packing up a moving van. She looked over at me, pure, seething hatred in her eyes. I just grinned, lifted my coffee mug, and gave her a mocking little wave. She slammed her car door and sped off. Maple Glen was finally at peace, and my motorcycle still parked right in my damn driveway.